And hello, 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 everyone. We are riffing about writing with the amazing author of the brand new, phenomenally best-selling book, Shatter the Sky. My order is in pre-order, and I'm hoping to get it in hand so that I can show it to you for our next interviews. But we are riffing about writing with Merryl Tengesdal. Now, I love that. It took me a little while to get Merryl Tengesdal, but once I got it, it can't unget it. You can't unhear. Merryl Tengesdal. Welcome, Merryl. How are you today?
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Right off the bat, I just want to have the listeners and the viewers get Merryl Tengesdal is such a unique name. And it's a combination of, like, there's a history behind it. So what's the history of Tengesdal? Where is that coming from?
Wow. So, yes. So when I got married, my husband's Norwegian, half Irish. So his last name is Tengesdal. His dad's from Norway. So, I had a very simple, easy maiden name. And then when I got married, kind of added a whole bunch of syllables at the end. So here we are.
Yeah, I actually know your maiden name because I read your book, but I'll leave this suspense for just a moment. But I also really like, there's a 10, right? Like, there's a 10 out of 10 in Merryl Tengesdal, right?
Yes.
Merryl Tengesdal. I absolutely love it. And there's a story around your first name too. And I know you and I are M&Ms. We're both M's, but
Yes.
What's the story around your first name?
So my first name, my mother and father, when I was born, my father wanted my name to start with an M. And my mom thought that Merrill was the best M name out there. Marav came in second. But
right, such a common name.
so that's what they settled on. I didn't really have a middle name. They couldn't agree to that. So I had no middle name growing up.
You had no middle name. And I noticed that you wrote that in the book, that you didn't have a middle name. And yet it seemed like there was something that the teachers and everyone who was around you kept saying, like, if you would have had a middle name as a kid, what would your middle name have been?
If I did, it would have probably been Settle Down, because I was all over the place. I always had to give that little extra.
Yeah, settle down. It's amazing because in reading your story, and especially the early part, your early history, growing up in the Bronx, growing up in that, like, really, it's a community of people, and it didn't come off when I was reading it as really hardship. Like, as in, there wasn't a time where you realized that there was hardship, because everyone within that community was within the same community. So It was sort of like, this is what it is.
Right. I mean, growing up, I didn't know anything about financial status. And, my mom worked hard, especially when she became a single parent. But I think, growing up in Co-op City, you have majority of Black people and Jewish people. And it was definitely that village raising the child type thing. People watched what you did. And if you were misbehaving, you knew your mom would know. I mean, that was the feel all the time. You were being watched. If, this is the 70s, Big Brother was out there, and it was in the form of, the older elders on the bench, or, up on the second floor watching you from the window.
Yeah, the Hawkeyes on you all the time.
Yes.
And so here you were, Merryl, right, which was like just agreed upon. It was before any stars, before any, names of famous people were called Merryl, but it was just agreed upon. Because I actually read in your book, if you had come out a boy, they would have named you.
They would have named me Marcus.
Yeah, so it's like a toss-up. It's like Marcus or Merryl. Doesn't, okay, it's a girl, Merryl. And then as you're growing up, hearing settle down, because it seemed like there was, like, that fear of someone telling your mom that you weren't settled down was enough reason for you to settle down.
Right. So Yeah, so I mean, even though there was that fear, I mean, I still had to be the person that I was. I mean, I can sometimes you just can't help it. I mean, I liked to be involved in things and understand how things worked. And for some adults, maybe that was not the proper way. And they tell me, hey, settle down, stop touching that, stop doing that. But I couldn't. There was just this curiosity within me that I had to understand and just do better each time.
And do you think that made you like sort of pigeonholed at, would you have called yourself a troublesome child, like a troublemaker?
I would just say I would get into things that people did not want me to get into. I could definitely remember, at least in high school, when I worked at the planetarium squad, when they first met me and they were interviewing, I touched everything on the workbench, just trying to figure out stuff. And they were not sure if they would hire me. They didn't think I had the control to stop
Mm.
messing with stuff. But it was just because I was so fascinated, so excited to be around things. So, it was the same with electronics, sports, everything I just had to be involved in and be there doing it and be an active participant. There was no hey, just sit back and watch. I'd watch for a second and I'm like, put me in. I'm ready. Let's go.
Like you don't like to be on the sidelines or on the bench, like that curiosity, like you had no control over the curiosity. Is that what drove it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even today, I don't really spectate sports. I find it to be not as exciting as actually being on the field and actually doing it. So I have a hard time just watching. I watch maybe a baseball game, but football or anything, I want to be out there doing. I can't like sit for long periods of time. It'll drive me
Be in the
crazy.
bleachers, yeah.
No.
It makes me right, it just really does make me think of like today in the world we're so constrained, like kids are so controlled, and there are quite a lot of kids, like I would say that you're a very kinetic learner. You need to learn by touching and manipulating and kind of getting your hands in there. And it's amazing that you were actually given that opportunity, because there was, and maybe part of that was the benefit of being in the Bronx, because if there would have been a whole world where you would have been in all kinds of trouble all the time from touching all kinds of things. Do you think that kind of because of that curiosity, that made you a curious adult?
So I think a little bit. I mean, I'm always a curious adult, but I think one of the things that kind of helped that my grandmother going to her house, I think she understood that I was that kid that needed those hands-on experiences. So she would let me mess with her old radios, and
Mm-hmm.
I would tear those things apart and just try to figure out how they worked and experiment and do things. So um, to me, if things worked, that was great. But if they didn't work, try to figure it out. And I think that's where, foundationally, I had that in me with when you touch things, you figure things out, you solve these problems, and you move on to the next thing.
Yeah, amazing that you had that the benefit of having that experience to be able to touch those things, because I could imagine like that element of that kinetic curiosity, like actually getting in there and tinkering, is probably the key to some of your greater successes that I read about in the book. But before I go too far in that, before I'm going ahead of myself here, because I just want to understand. I really want a beautiful picture of that little Merrill, that little girl, Merrill David. I know that, you had a very simple maiden name. And yet from that simplicity, simple maiden name, simple childhood, simple, little kinetic child, curious child, touching everything. I know you were an only child, like you didn't have a brother or sister. Did you ever want to have a brother or sister?
I think early on I wanted a sibling, but by the time I hit 9 or 10, I was like, no way, there's no way I can't. it would be difficult for me to share. It would be difficult for me to share space, room. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment.
Right.
I like my room space. So I grew out of that pretty quickly.
Yeah. By the time you were, and do you remember when you were earlier than 9 or 10? Did you care whether it was a brother or a sister when you still wanted one?
I didn't care. To me, it
No.
was just another companion. But as I got older and I just got more comfortable with myself,
Right.
as far as a kid can be comfortable with themselves, there was just no need to do that.
Yeah. So that's a big question, actually, and it does make, very often with only children, and you reference it quite a lot in the book, this notion, identity of being a lone wolf.
Yeah.
Do you think that only child made you into a lone wolf, or do you think you would have been a lone wolf anyway?
I think I would have anyway, just due to my upbringing. When I was younger, I got teased quite a bit. So that kind of made me retreat. Even though I like to be social, I like to play sports, all that. It was probably a lot of the teasing that just made me want to be out there, do those things, and then quickly go back to my room and kind of decompress from the whole experience. But yeah, my whole life just, I could spend hours by myself with myself and entertain myself. That's
Mm.
probably one of the things of being born in the 70s, being a latchkey kid in the 80s. Give me uh, a box and some crayons and a little bit of food, and I'll be entertained even till today with myself for probably months.
Right,
So bring it on,
right.
COVID. I can stay locked down forever.
I mean, it's true. Like I'm with you. I was growing up in that time period, right? Like we didn't have. I mean, there were cartoons on one of the channels on Saturday mornings, and
Yes.
sometimes at noon they play the Flintstones. But it's not even like we could find outside entertainment by turning on the TV at that time. Yet that came later. That there was the next decade where they just had TV all the time. But for us, like we actually had to find something to do. There was nothing interesting on TV all the time.
Right.
Um, that being said, like I think that the curiosity and the kinetics and the the lone wolfiness. There's also part of that where you see that in the early stories of a lot of people who have accomplished some really big things. Like if you read the autobiography of Elon Musk or of Albert Einstein, or of people who today we may look at and really quickly put into a box that might say something like on the Asperger's spectrum, on the autism spectrum, or something, right, like that it's channeled. If it wasn't channeled in the right way, it becomes maybe troublesome or maybe outside of the box. Do you think any of that kind of came into play for you? Do you think like that if there was a quick diagnosis that they would have said to you, hey, you've got this potential to...
I think if any diagnosis, I probably would have been ADD or
Yeah.
I don't know if I was hyper, but I think at that time the cure for kids who just couldn't sit still was to get a spanking or something to put them in check. So,
Right.
and that, I mean, I didn't die from it. Was it always pleasant times? No. Did I run my mouth a lot in school? Yes. But I'm still the person that I am today. So I appreciate everything my mom has done. But yeah, I probably would have been diagnosed with something.
If
Thank
it were
goodness I
today, right?
wasn't.
Yeah, well, you know what? I mean, this is one of those things that we really need to have an awareness around, because you're right. Like the way that we dealt in previous generations, like the, as we know, ADHD, autism, all of this is on the rise. They're saying, oh, it's on the rise today. Well, maybe it's on the rise because we're looking to put it into the box called this. Whereas, back a few generations, a few centuries, a few decades, a few generations ago, it was just a child that the elders around would look and go, that child needs sports. That child needs martial arts. That child needs to be, put into something where they can get some of this curious energy out. And that might have been the benefit, in fact, that you had at the time. Like, we don't diagnose, we just get that kid to get that energy out.
Yes.
Could that?
So, I mean, I'll tell you a quick story. My
Yeah.
son, when we were in Virginia, he turned 4. And they put him right into pre-K, and he had a hard time adjusting to the pre-K, and because he's a big kid. I married a half Viking, so my son was, at 2 was 3 feet tall. So
Wow.
I mean, he's been in the 95 plus percentile all his life. And so when he got there, he was probably one of the biggest kids, but the youngest kid. So emotionally, he was 4. And I
Right.
remember, and he's just all this energy and everything. And I remember his teacher, who couldn't get him down in the afternoon for a nap, she came to me and she says, I think your son needs to be evaluated. And I was like, huh. I was like, why don't you write me a letter and put it in writing? And usually when I say put it in writing, that means I'm actually telling you non-verbally that, how dare you say this? And if you put this in writing, we're talking to your boss. So she did. And I had a discussion with her supervisor of a lady who said my son should be evaluated, who has no place to say that because she's not a professional nor she's a teacher. And, some other things came out, and a couple of days later, she quit her job. So a couple of things. One, I definitely don't disagree. My son is a ball of energy, but I love
Right.
it. And being a kid like that myself, I know how to channel that.
Right.
Could he be diagnosed? I'm sure. But he won't be, because he does soccer, he does jujitsu, he does swimming, he does some gymnastic stuff.
Mm-hmm.
We keep him active, we keep his mind active. He is wicked smart. And, it's good that I'm his mom and I have that same amount of energy, because I know how to deal with that energy. Because maybe as I was growing up, maybe some way I could have been dealt with a little better.
Yeah. I actually have chills. I have chills because I think why it's really important that we bring this in, that we bring this up, is that I think people will look at your story and your accomplishments. And I mean, I'm reading this book and it's like blowing my mind, going like, what, this woman, unbelievably incredible, the things that you've accomplished. But what I really want to look behind is that those were techniques that you were using. Like, you didn't come by, I mean, you came into the military looking to have that curiosity and control element satisfied in your own life, right?
Yes.
Like, part of the reason that you became an astronaut had to do with that same little girl that would touch her, would pull apart her grandmother's radio and put it back together, right? That we're not supposed to actually settle down kids like you or kids like your son. Like that, we're not actually supposed to settle you down, because in settling you down, you wouldn't have accomplished. Like, if you had settled down, right?
Right.
If you
So,
had listened.
yes, my son should listen to me sometimes, hence this week. But yeah, sometimes we should listen, but other times, if you're able to guide people down a certain way and channel that energy, it would be just so much more productive in terms of what they can accomplish, and the confidence that's given in doing so. So, um, I think it's pretty important with my son Flynn, with Malia, who brings different sets of skill sets and energies to something.
I'm glad you brought up Malia and Flynn, because I was actually going to ask, with you being an only child and having that feeling of I want a companion, and is that why you made the decision to have two kids?
Not entirely. I mean, I think for me, originally with my husband, I wanted 0 kids and he wanted 2.
Yeah.
And I decided later on that we would try for one. One, because even though I can have kids, doesn't mean I really want them. So,
Right.
but I knew that meant a lot to my husband. And it took me a little bit to get on board with, you have to give up a lot to have a kid. You have
Yeah.
to play second fiddle to your child. So as an only child, we get labeled as we're being spoiled and stuff, but I knew there were certain things as a single person that I like to do. And I had to be okay with saying, all right, I won't be able to do that for a while until he's old enough to be able to, one, hang out with me, or two, be
Right.
old enough that he's out of the house that I can do it on my own. Um, so the reason why we decided to have um, Malia is because my husband and I, we've done very well, and we have been successful, and we wanted to give someone, a child who was dealt a poor hand and maybe on a path to to something not so great, to give them the opportunity to be the best human being that they can possibly be. And we have that energy and time to do that. Especially, I'm retired. I can put more into that. And my husband, he works as well, but he could put more time. So invest time into another kid. And we knew that Flynn was this energetic, strong human being that, I- we knew he can absorb some of it and still be able to deal with and be confident enough that if we put a little more attention into her, that he would be okay. So
Yeah.
that's why we decided. I mean, there was just a whole bunch of things we thought about. I mean, some people think, oh, I want a baby for adoption, I want to do this or that. But I mean, how does it change the whole family dynamics? Because we're a very stable family. So now we're bringing someone else in. This could be very catastrophic. This could tear families apart. So we had to be really mindful and thoughtful about how it was going to affect each of us. So we took the leap.
Amazing. Amazing. And I just, so much, so much needs to be said for that. So much needs to be said for you as a mother. Uh, because when people read your book, they will see these incredible, I mean, you have literally shattered the sky time and time and time again, and shattered the mold and shattered, I mean, really, and you and I have talked about how we don't like shatter the glass ceiling, like break
No,
the glass ceiling, because it's like, well, once the glass ceiling is broken, we've got to sweep up the floor. but and we can't dance barefoot.
very true.
But I know you and I have talked about that before, where uh, even a glass ceiling is there is still a limitation, and you're here saying no limits. But
Right.
I think like this is really important. I really want people to get um, the not only did you do all of those amazing sky shattering uh, missions and just incredible things. And I'm not going to delve into them too much today because we'll have another interview and really talk about the career aspect. But I want them to really, people to really understand like that you didn't sacrifice who you are as a mother, and a wife and a mother and what that looks like in your day-to-day family. So I just want to, as we're wrapping up today's interview, and we're going to go into another interview coming soon, but how does it look in a sense of parenting with you and your husband? How does it, the share of responsibilities? I mean, like, how does one woman have it all? How does that look?
I, yeah. So how do you have it all? I mean, it's controlled chaos sometimes, and it's controlled chaos. My husband and I, because once I retired, I took on another job that I could put as much time into it as I wanted. And I really wanted to inspire, motivate people through fitness.
Yeah.
And that gave me more time with my son, and we were able to homestead in a location where my son could go to the same school, have the same friends. I thought that was important for him because that happened with me. I saw coming back to this area, he walks to school. Like I
Right.
walked to school all the way to high school. But with the kids, we, in the morning, if my husband, since COVID, he's been teleworking and going back to work. So on the days he's here, he usually will maybe assist in the morning with the routine.
Mhm.
I don't mind it, but actually he throws my whole routine off in the morning. But he typically, it's okay. And just I roll with it. At nighttime, he usually puts the kids to bed and reads to them. So usually I'm in charge of the morning routine. He does the evening routine. And then throughout the day, I pick up the kids and I shuttle them around to different areas. If they both have separate events, which happens sometimes, the days that we have that, my husband Shell's home and he'll take one of the kids to one of the events if they're overlapping. So
Yeah.
we share the responsibility really well on the weekends. Cleaning wise, we share the responsibilities. The kids clean their own bathroom. And anything else extra that I have them do, they may get paid. They don't get allowances. I tell them the fact that you have to have good grades and clean your bathroom gives you access to the amenities in this house. Anything extra you have to work for. So same thing I had growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And would you say that your husband is more the nurturing kind of motherly one, or are you more of the motherly one? Is
We're
one
both
more strict?
we're
Yeah.
both military. We're both military people. So he's in the reserves. He's been in for over 35 years. We're both disciplinary. I think we both have nurturing sides, but we definitely set hard boundaries.
Yeah.
And I think, especially for Malia, that's very important because she has had a very tumultuous life up until a year ago. And I think Flynn is our compliant child because we've had him since day one. So we are nurturing to a point, but we're always nurturing with that lesson learned in there. I always say life lessons. So if as Flynn was growing up, I would tell him to do something when he was younger, and if he didn't do it and hurt himself and come over and cry, I'd look at him and say, "You had a life lesson, didn't you?"
Yeah.
And then I'd be like, "What did I tell you?" So I think at 4 he started using the term life lesson, and we still use it in the house, which is really funny.
So that just beautifully encapsulates actually some of the things that in reading your book, you tell stories that are in fact life lessons.
Yeah.
Like that.
Absolutely.
As I'm, yeah, I feel like the benefit that Flynn is having, and both your children, both Flynn and Malia, are having of having you give them the life lessons in a day to day. I feel like when I'm reading your book, there are, and it's not life lessons like kind of banging you over the head with, you should do this, you should do that, and it's enforced, but it's just wisdom that comes from some of the experiences.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
The life lessons, especially when you see your kids go through it, they have to, but you just have to stand back and go, "Oh, this is going to be bad." And then when it happens and they're crying, you just got to say, "Hey, it's a life lesson," give them a hug. But like, "Hey guy," I tell my kids all the time, I'm like, "I've been on this earth 4 more decades than you. Please, just once, just listen to my
right.
life lessons."
Well, I mean, when they're your own kids, they're meant to not listen to your life lessons, or at least for some time, right? Like if they didn't have that rebellion, then they're. But for the general, like for in fact, like the general audience, I mean to say, like, I remember once even watching a documentary that Deepak Chopra's son did. It was called Decoding Deepak. And it was basically home footage of Deepak Chopra sitting around. And we're all sitting thinking, on tenterhooks, on bated breath, what's Deepak Chopra's wisdom going to be about life? Meanwhile, his kids are like, oh, dad's at it again. And they're right, like your own kids are going to be,
I know.
are going to be the ones that are pushing back against that. But for the reader, for me reading this book, I found like within those stories is woven this golden thread. And so it's no surprise for me to learn that you have something that you give your kids called life lessons, because that's in fact how you wrote your book. It's in fact, your book is actually kind of like a motherly, nurturing life lessons for the reader.
Yes.
I love that humble, the humility of like, yeah, that's actually what it is. It's just a series of beautiful life lessons. And with that, I'm going to actually have you give us one life lesson, and then we'll wrap it up for today. We'll reconvene for our next interview. But one life lesson around, there are some Merrillisms that you share throughout the book. And I know you're looking at it going, which one do I pull out now? But they're...
Yes. So, I mean, I think when people first meet me, they have this perception of me, or when they hear my resume, they think, oh, military person, very hard, very, very staunch, very, just a lot of things that, drill instructor, things come to people's minds. And I do admit, I may, yell for you. I yell a lot. So I may yell for you. I may yell with you. And sometimes I may yell at you, but I'm always in your corner. And I tell my kids that all the time. Admittedly, I get loud with them, but at the end, I'm always wanting them to be better. And I'm always in their corner rooting for them, whether they may think so or not.
You know what? I absolutely love that. And that is just a beautiful takeaway image. I can picture it like in the boxing ring. And you, as I'm reading the book, I feel connected that I want you in my corner, yelling for me, at me. And so say it again. Sometimes I yell.
I yell for you, with you, or at you.
Yeah, but always in your corner.
Corner.
I absolutely love that image, because every single person in this world needs somebody who's in their corner, willing to yell for them, with them, because sometimes we need to yell it, get it out, and at them. I absolutely love that. And with that, I'm going to say goodbye for today. And we're going to go on to get some yelling for me, with me, and at me in just a moment. And we'll see you again. We'll see you again next time on Riffing About Writing.